She stopped texting first. She stopped asking how your day was. And suddenly, you're chasing someone who barely notices your existence. But the moment you stop reacting emotionally, everything changes. Because a woman pays attention to the man who values himself more than her attention. The moment you feel ignored by someone you care about, your mind enters a kind of emotional panic that is hard to control. You start overthinking every small detail. You look back at your last conversation and try to decode every word, every emoji, every delay in response. You convince yourself that maybe if you say the right thing or explain yourself better or send just one more message, things will go back to how they were. But this is exactly where most people lose their power without even realizing it. The instinct to chase is not actually love. It is fear. Fear of losing attention, fear of being replaced, fear of not being important anymore. And when fear takes control, logic disappears. The reality is that chasing someone who is deliberately or even unintentionally ignoring you does not create attraction. It creates pressure. And pressure rarely brings someone closer. It usually pushes them further away. When you continuously try to reach out without receiving the same energy back, you are not building connection. You are creating imbalance. And imbalance in emotional effort is always noticeable, even if it is not openly acknowledged. The more you try to fix the silence by talking more, the more you highlight your dependence on their response. That dependence slowly reduces your value in their eyes because it signals that your emotional state is controlled externally. A man or woman who reacts immediately to being ignored often falls into a cycle of emotional instability. One moment they are hopeful, the next moment they are anxious, and then they are frustrated. This emotional roller coaster becomes visible through their behavior. Messages become longer, tone becomes heavier, and patience disappears. But instead of improving the situation, this energy usually makes the other person withdraw even more. Not because they are cruel, but because excessive emotional pursuit feels overwhelming and suffocating. Stopping the chase does not mean playing games or pretending not to care. It means recognizing that your attention has value and should not be given where it is not being matched. It is about breaking the automatic reaction of responding to silence with more effort. When someone ignores you, the strongest immediate response is not to fill that silence with noise. It is to allow space to exist without trying to control it. That space reveals clarity. It shows whether the connection was real or whether it was only sustained by your constant effort. In that moment of restraint, something important happens. You begin to regain control over yourself. Instead of reacting emotionally, you start observing. Instead of chasing answers, you start focusing on your own state of mind. And slowly, the urgency to be noticed fades, replaced by self-awareness. This is where emotional strength begins to form, not in getting a response, but in refusing to lose yourself when there is none. When someone ignores you, most people assume the solution is to do more, say more, and stay more available. They believe that constant presence will somehow remind the other person of their value. But human psychology does not work like that. Excess availability often creates emotional saturation, where your presence becomes something predictable rather than appreciated. And once predictability replaces curiosity, attraction naturally begins to fade. This is why stepping back is not a sign of weakness, but a shift in control. It is the moment where you stop trying to prove your importance and instead allow your absence to speak for you. Absence has a psychological weight that presence cannot replace. When you are always there, always responding, always initiating, the other person never gets a chance to feel your lack. And without feeling your absence, they never truly recognize your value. People only understand what they had when it is no longer easily accessible. This is not manipulation. It is basic emotional perception. Value is often measured in distance. The further something moves out of reach, the more the mind begins to evaluate its importance. But when you are constantly within reach, you become part of the background rather than something worth actively thinking about. Most men fail in this situation because they confuse emotional anxiety with action. They feel ignored, and instead of stabilizing themselves, they try to fix the discomfort by reaching out again. They send another message, react to every delay, and try to reinsert themselves into someone's attention. But every unnecessary attempt only reduces the emotional gap that is needed for reflection. When there is no space, there is no room for realization. And without realization, there is no appreciation. Letting her feel your absence does not mean disappearing out of insecurity or playing psychological tricks. It means redirecting your energy back into your own life. It means shifting focus from seeking attention to building direction. When you are busy improving yourself, your time stops revolving around someone else's response. You begin to operate from a place where your happiness is not waiting in a chat window. That change alone alters your emotional frequency. You are no longer chasing connection. You are living your life. And here is what often happens when you do this correctly. The silence that once made you anxious begins to stabilize you instead. The need to constantly check your phone starts fading. The urge to send another message weakens. And in that space, something subtle but powerful begins to form. Presence without pressure. You are still there, but not as someone waiting. You are there as someone progressing. And this difference is always felt, even if it is never spoken about directly. When you stop filling every gap with attention, the other person is left with their own perception of your absence. And that absence is no longer just silence. It becomes a contrast between how available you used to be and how unavailable you have become. This contrast forces reflection because the mind naturally compares past and present experiences. It is in that comparison that appreciation sometimes begins to surface, not because you demanded it, but because you stopped preventing it from forming. One of the most damaging patterns when someone ignores you is the unconscious shift from connection to validation. At first, you may genuinely like the person and enjoy talking to them, but once they start pulling away, your focus slowly changes. Instead of simply wanting to connect, you begin to want reassurance. You start looking for signs that you still matter, that you are still important, that you are still enough for them to respond to you. This shift is subtle at first, but it completely changes your emotional state. You are no longer interacting freely. You are now trying to prove your worth through their responses. Validation-seeking behavior is dangerous because it places your value in someone else's control. Every delayed reply feels like rejection. Every short message feels like disrespect. Every unread notification becomes a source of anxiety. You begin to measure your self-worth not by who you are, but by how quickly someone replies to you or how warmly they respond. This creates a fragile emotional foundation where your confidence rises and falls depending on external behavior that you cannot control. And when your inner stability depends on external validation, you are always vulnerable. The deeper issue is that validation seeking often goes unnoticed by the person doing it. You may think you are just trying harder or showing interest, but in reality, your energy shifts from confident expression to emotional dependence. You start over-explaining things. You double text to make sure your message is seen. You reread your own messages, wondering if you said something wrong. You begin to adjust your tone, your timing, even your personality slightly, just to get a better response. And slowly, without realizing it, you are no longer presenting your true self. You are presenting a version of yourself that you think will be accepted. This is where attraction weakens, because confidence is naturally attractive, but neediness is not. When someone senses that their attention is being treated as a source of emotional survival for you, the dynamic shifts. Instead of seeing you as someone with independent value, they begin to see you as someone who is seeking approval. And once that perception forms, even your best efforts start to lose impact because they are no longer seen as genuine expressions, but as attempts to gain validation. True confidence is not about pretending you do not care. It is about not needing constant reassurance to feel secure in yourself. It is the ability to stay emotionally steady even when someone's response is inconsistent. It is understanding that your worth does not increase when someone replies and does not decrease when they don't. When you operate from this mindset, your communication becomes lighter, more natural, and more grounded. You no longer feel the need to chase emotional confirmation because your identity is not dependent on it. When validation is no longer your goal, your behavior naturally changes. You stop forcing conversations. You stop trying to fix silence. You stop interpreting every small action as a signal about your value. Instead, you begin to interact from a place of self-assurance, where your presence is not an attempt to be chosen, but an expression of who you already are internally. When someone starts ignoring you or becoming inconsistent, most people fall into the trap of listening too closely to words instead of paying attention to behavior. Words are easy to say, easy to adjust, and often used to maintain comfort or avoid confrontation. But actions require effort, intention, and consistency. And that is why actions always reveal the truth more clearly than words ever can. When there is a mismatch between what someone says and what they do, it is the actions that should be trusted, not the comforting sentences that make you feel better in the moment. Many people ignore this reality because they are emotionally invested in potential rather than present behavior. They remember how things used to be or how things could become if the other person changed. So they hold on to words like, "I'm busy, I'll reply later," or "I still care," even when the behavior does not support it. But the truth is, genuine interest does not remain hidden behind constant confusion. When someone values you, it becomes visible in their consistency. They make time, they respond with effort, and they do not leave you guessing your place in their life. Observing actions requires emotional discipline because it forces you to accept reality without filtering it through hope. Hope makes you believe that temporary inconsistency is just a phase. Hope convinces you that silence will soon turn into attention again. But actions do not lie in the long term. If someone repeatedly shows distance, delays, or lack of effort, then that pattern itself becomes the answer, regardless of what they say when they return. One message of care cannot cancel out a long pattern of neglect. The difficulty lies in emotional attachment. When you are emotionally connected to someone, you naturally want to believe their words because words feel reassuring. They temporarily reduce anxiety and give you a sense of stability. But that stability is often false if it is not supported by consistent behavior. Real stability comes from clarity, not confusion. And clarity comes when you stop overvaluing promises and start evaluating patterns. Another important aspect of observing actions is understanding effort distribution. Pay attention to who initiates conversations, who maintains them, and who disappears without explanation. Notice who makes time despite being busy and who only appears when it is convenient. Notice whether communication feels mutual or one-sided. These small patterns, when viewed together, form a clear picture of interest levels. And once you see the pattern clearly, emotional confusion starts to reduce naturally. It is also important to understand that inconsistency itself is a form of communication. When someone is present one moment and absent the next, that behavior is also sending a message. When someone only responds when they are free but never prioritizes you, that is also a message. You do not need dramatic rejection to understand disinterest. Subtle neglect repeated over time is enough to reveal it. When you start prioritizing actions over words, your emotional clarity improves significantly. You stop overanalyzing sentences and start recognizing patterns. You stop getting attached to temporary reassurance and start valuing consistent behavior. This shift protects you from unnecessary emotional confusion because you are no longer living in interpretation. You are living in observation. Emotional control is one of the rarest qualities in today's world, especially when it comes to relationships and situations where you feel ignored. Most people believe power is about dominance, loud reactions, or proving a point in the moment. But in reality, true power is quiet. It is the ability to remain stable when your emotions are being tested, when your ego is hurt, and when your mind is pushing you to react impulsively. When someone ignores you, the natural instinct is to respond immediately, to question, to demand answers, or to express frustration. But emotional control is the discipline of choosing response over reaction, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over temporary emotional relief. When you lack emotional control, your reactions become visible very quickly. You start sending messages that you later regret. You start asking questions that do not bring clarity, but only expose your emotional dependence. You begin to interpret silence as disrespect and delay as rejection. This internal instability reflects in your external behavior. The tone of your communication changes, your patience reduces, and your actions become driven by anxiety rather than awareness. And once your emotions start leading your behavior, the situation stops being about connection and starts becoming about control. Control over your own feelings that you are slowly losing. A person with emotional control does not allow external behavior to dictate their internal state. If someone replies late, they do not immediately assume negativity. If someone goes silent, they do not instantly chase or panic. Instead, they observe. They pause. They allow space between stimulus and response. That space is where power exists, because in that space, you are not reacting from emotion. You are responding from understanding. And that difference completely changes how you are perceived and how you perceive yourself. Emotional control is not about suppressing feelings or pretending not to care. It is about acknowledging emotions without letting them dictate your decisions. You can feel disappointed, confused, or even hurt, but still choose not to act in a way that compromises your dignity. That is where strength is built. Because anyone can express emotions, but very few can regulate them under pressure. And regulation is what separates emotional weakness from emotional maturity. When someone ignores you, your emotional control becomes your silent identity. Instead of chasing attention, you redirect your focus inward. Instead of demanding answers, you observe behavior. Instead of trying to fix uncertainty immediately, you allow time to reveal clarity. This calmness does not go unnoticed. Even if not spoken about, emotional stability is felt in your energy. People subconsciously respect individuals who do not collapse emotionally in uncertain situations. Over time, emotional control also changes how you value yourself. You stop measuring your worth based on someone's response speed or attention level. You begin to detach your identity from external validation. This creates a sense of inner stability where your mood is no longer controlled by another person's availability. You are no longer emotionally reactive. You are emotionally grounded. And that grounding gives you a sense of independence that cannot be shaken by silence, distance, or inconsistency. In moments of emotional challenge, control becomes the difference between losing yourself and maintaining self-respect. It ensures that no matter how someone behaves, your dignity remains intact. It prevents you from saying things you do not mean, chasing people who are pulling away, or making emotional decisions that you will later regret. Instead, it keeps you centered, aware, and in control of your own responses, even when everything outside feels uncertain. The strongest position you can ever hold in any situation where you feel ignored is the willingness to walk away without hesitation. Most people misunderstand walking away as a dramatic action or a reaction taken in anger. But in reality, true walking away is calm, quiet, and emotionally detached. It is not about proving a point, and it is not about trying to make someone realize your value through absence. It is about recognizing that your self-respect is more important than staying in a situation where your presence is not being valued or matched with effort. When you are willing to walk away, you stop negotiating your worth in places where it is not being acknowledged. The inability to walk away often keeps people stuck in cycles of emotional confusion. They continue to stay connected even when they are being ignored, hoping that things will eventually change. They accept inconsistent communication, delayed responses, and emotional distance because they are afraid of losing the connection entirely. But this fear slowly becomes the reason they lose themselves. They remain in situations where they are over-investing emotionally while receiving very little in return. And over time, this imbalance starts to affect their confidence, their peace of mind, and their sense of identity. Being willing to walk away does not mean you stop caring instantly. It means you value yourself enough to not stay where your care is not reciprocated. It is the understanding that your time and emotional energy are not meant to be endlessly available to someone who is uncertain about your importance. When you stay in such situations without boundaries, you unintentionally teach the other person that your presence is guaranteed, no matter how they behave. But when you create the possibility of leaving, the dynamic naturally shifts, because nothing makes someone reflect more than the realization that access to you is not unlimited. Walking away is also about emotional clarity. When you are deeply attached, everything feels confusing. You analyze every message, every delay, every change in tone, but distance creates perspective. When you step back, you begin to see patterns that were previously hidden by emotional involvement. You start to understand whether the connection was mutual or one-sided, consistent or conditional. This clarity is often uncomfortable, but it is necessary for growth, because clarity removes illusion, and without illusion, you can no longer be emotionally manipulated by inconsistency. There is also a quiet strength in not needing closure from someone who is already showing you through their actions that they are not fully present. Many people stay because they want explanations, apologies, or emotional reassurance before leaving. But real strength is the ability to observe enough behavior to make a decision without needing verbal confirmation. When actions consistently show distance, lack of effort, or emotional absence, that itself becomes enough information to step away. Being willing to walk away ultimately shifts your entire emotional position. You stop operating from fear of loss and start operating from self-respect. You no longer chase clarity from someone who is unclear about you. You no longer seek attention from someone who gives it inconsistently. Instead, you begin to understand that your presence is a choice, not an obligation, and that choice should only exist where it is valued equally in return.